Well, the spate of journalists' arrests and detention in Nigeria has become a rather disturbing trend, threatening the very fabric of democracy and press freedom in the country. In recent years, numerous journalists have been arrested, detained, and even charged with dubious offenses simply for performing their duties. The arrests and detentions have been carried out by various security agencies, including the police, state security service, and military personnel. In many cases, journalists have been held without charge, denied access to legal representation, and subjected to inhumane treatment. This spate of arrests and detentions has a chilling effect on press freedom as journalists are forced to self-censor, fearing retribution from the authorities. It also undermines the public's right to information as important stories are left unreported. Achike Chude is the National Secretary of the Nigeria Union of Journalists. He joins us from our Abuja studio to discuss the threats to the lives and livelihood of journalists. Good to have you on Newsday.
Yeah, it's good to be with you.
It's good to thank you for making the time to join us. Now let's start with the response which the government has made to some of the claims of these arrests. They're saying that the government is saying that some of these arrests are necessary for national security reasons. What do you make of that response?
It's ridiculous. It's not in the place of the government to tell us that. If the journalists have committed an offense that is clear, there is a process. You cannot be the judge and jury in your own case. You cannot be the complainant, the prosecutor, and the judge in your own case. The law of this country has provided a remedy. You go to court, and then you prove your day in court. You prove your case in court, and then the court will now take a decision. That is the rule. And so when you say you are detaining journalists for the sake of national security, exactly, what national security? What have they done? What threat do they constitute to the body politic of Nigeria? So I think that security forces should look deep down within themselves. And of course, it's obvious that they know that what they are doing is wrong. They must know that what they are doing is wrong. And of course, they are doing it on behalf of those who have sent them. But they can't come and tell us that they are detaining journalists for national security. The duty, the responsibility of journalists is to provide, a stable democratic culture in this country with the kind of reporting that they do. And that's why the Constitution gives them an ample recognition, knowing how important they are for the democratization of the country and the progress that the country can make. It has been said that if you want to know the level of freeness of a democracy, then you look at the level of freeness of the media. That is the barometer you use. And so when you have a media that is hounded, when you are trying to close the civic space for the practice of journalism, it tells you that our democracy is failing. That is the biggest indicator that this country's democracy is failing. Because those who are running the show, those who are taking political decisions on behalf of the citizens of this country have become intolerant of people challenging them. It is the duty of the media, journalists, to hold government, institutions and government officials accountable. If they fail to do that, then they are not doing their job. And in the process of doing their job, you are now saying that you are holding them for security reasons. Perhaps the people that are hounding them are the ones that are posing a threat to the security of this country.
And as a journalist that has worked within this country for a while, what is the level of your fear currently, seeing as things have been happening in the media that have been giving cause for fear? Is it more elevated now than it has been in the past? And also, what do you make of this case that has been trending on Twitter and the internet space for a bit of a certain PDOM Nigeria who is a reported whistleblower and has leaked some quite sensitive documents from the government over time, allegedly, and his alleged abduction. Also, the fact that some other investigative journalists, including David Hundeyin, who we know is on the lam in a foreign country for fear of his own life, What do you make of the reports of the abduction and also the attempts to rope, allegedly, David Hundeyin into the allegations and crimes of this said PDOM individual who has been released from custody, but was in custody for a while and had the Twitter sphere ablaze? What do you make of these stories?
Yeah, well, the monster of, journalist intimidation and harassment is growing with impunity. It has gotten worse. And I think what is even worse, what even makes the whole situation even more harrowing is that it is happening under a civilian, democratic process. And so what it tells you, we have a situation where under the military dispensation, we had a lot of disdain and contempt being exhibited by the military leaders for journalists and the practice of journalism. In the country today, it would appear that it is the political actors themselves who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of a proper democratic culture that are the ones now endangering the polity by hitting up the polity as a result of their disdain and contempt for people who are doing their job. And we have seen what I would describe as a democratization or liberalization of the harassment and intimidation of journalists. Before, it used to be within the purview of perhaps the security agencies acting on behalf of the government to harass journalists. But now you now have people from the military picking up journalists because they wrote something that they did not like, or people within the echelon of the Nigerian police force picking up people because they wrote stories that are related to the police that they did not like. You also have governors also, cashing in, on the intimidation and harassment of journalists by also ordering for the arrest of journalists from across the country. And this is, what is happening. And I think so when you look at, you realize that we do not seem to be making progress when it comes to the establishing a proper democratic culture in the country. All of these are indications, that things are really getting out of hand. And then as for the issue of the whistleblower, of course it's an irony because, again, the National Assembly came up with the Whistleblower Law, or the Whistleblower Act, to protect people who, do whistleblowing, all in an attempt to ensure that we have a country that thrives, where people can hold government officials accountable. And so you now have the same government that was responsible for at least promulgating this law or this act by the National Assembly. You now have the same, government harassing people who actually work in conformity with the provisions of the Whistleblowers Act. And so that's part of the contradiction. But like I said, it's an indication of the degeneration of our democratic culture and values. Instead of growing, and being disdainful of this kind of attitude, it seems to be growing in impunity.
Well said, Achike. Now, you touched on so many points about what we're witnessing, the liberalization or democratization of the harassment of journalists. But what I really want to dwell on is that where you touched on the Whistleblower Act or law that you're saying was this same government that was responsible for propagating the act is probably at the forefront of doing the opposite. When it comes to legal protections currently in Nigeria, where do you see gaps that need to be urgently addressed?
Yeah, well, this government exactly, did not exactly, promulgate the Whistleblower Act. But what I just meant was that, government is a continuum. So whatever laws you meet on the ground, you have a duty to, follow suit and then implement those laws. Obviously, there are gaps, but I want to believe that some of these gaps are not even there. It's just that government officials do not want to do their job, and they have not. And people talk about the barrack mentality. It would appear that the militarization, the long years of a military rule, also rubbed off badly on our political leaders. And so it would appear that all of these things that they show, these despotic dispositions, that they show, would seem to be a hangover from a military dictatorship. But it's about 25 years of unbroken democracy. You would think that a quarter of a century is enough for people to forget bad attitudes and all that. So they obviously have not. So I think that the National Assembly, I think, has tried to weigh in on it, condemning the spate of harassment of journalists, and have promised to also make laws that will be aimed at protecting the media, the media more forcefully. And I think that that is the way to go, because obviously, and then of course, the Cybercrime Act is just one problem that has led to an increase in the abuse of journalists, intimidation and harassment of journalists. On a flimsy excuse, anything that you now do, it becomes a basis for the cybercrime, activation of the Cybercrime Act by security agencies, misinterpreting, obviously, the provisions of the Cybercrime Act. So even if you say journalists have committed crimes, in violation of the Cybercrime Act, it is not your duty to be the judge and jury. You take them to the proper authorities immediately. And a lot of these things are bailable offenses so that they can continue to exercise their freedom. But that is not the case. You have journalists being locked up on the order of head of one security agency or not for weeks, a clear violation of his fundamental right. But like I said, it's an indication that our democracy is failing spectacularly. If the media that is supposed to be the fourth estate of the realm, that has a constitutional mandate and duty to protect even our democracy itself by them, carrying out their work effectively. If you do not allow that, then what are you saying about our democracy? You are just telling Nigerians that this democracy is not working. And that is the wrong kind of message for the politicians themselves, who are supposed to be the greatest beneficiary of a democratic proper democratic culture, for them to now engage in endangering a democracy themselves by these perfidious acts.
And the shame is some of these top politicians themselves, back in the day when, people like me were children, they were advocates and journalists themselves doing equally bad things, or not bad, but, some questionable things back in the day in order to get their message across. But the saying that the pen is mightier than the sword. So knowing the responsibility that we have as journalists, knowing how severely that these messages can be taken, and knowing that we are often scapegoated for our job, what advice do you have for journalists going forward, apart from them, doing the obvious, making sure they double check their sources and have their facts correct, apart from the obvious things that journalists should be doing to make their work succinct and precise? What word of advice do you have for them for the next couple of weeks and years of this administration?
Courage. They should also understand that they are not there for themselves. They are there for the society also, and they must engage, fairly with all sides. They must make sure that they rise above the fray. They must, make sure that they cross the T's and dot the I's. We do not want to see journalists that are involved in one act of infamy, or the other. We will not rush to their defense when they clearly act in violation of the ethics of the profession. But they can be sure that will be there for them when the chips are down, when they are being, prosecuted and persecuted for doing their work. We will definitely be there for them, and we have done that. In the past few weeks, we have done a series of releases, media releases, showing solidarity for our comrades who are being victimized, just for doing their job. So we continue to stand by them. Let them just, like you said, ultimately the pen is mightier than the sword. And I would just want those people who want to embark on an autocratic journey. It doesn't end well for the perpetrators. We have seen it. History tells us, how they eventually end up. Unfortunately, by the time they end up in a bad way, they drag the society with it, and that is what we don't want. We love this country and want our country to be great. And our country can be great if the politicians will learn to, exercise caution in the way they treat journalists.
Well said. Now, of course, you spoke about the key word there being courage, and I believe you're speaking for the NUJ at this point. But I'd like to ask you what role you think the international organizations or foreign governments ought to play in situations like this. Are they living up to their role from your assessment or opinion?
Yeah, well, I think some of them have been expressing solidarity with Nigerian journalists. They have also expressed worry at what they see as the closing civic space in this country with regards to the practice of journalism. And so they have shown solidarity, and but we hope that they do more than that. They have been articulating some of these incidences that have been happening to journalists in Nigeria. And of course, it's very clear, they have also indicated that Nigeria has become a more challenging place for journalists to practice their profession, and that is very, very unfortunate. So I think that more needs to be done. Governments need to talk and to speak out, and then also to get in touch with their counterparts in Nigeria, government officials, and also lay the rules that they are not abiding by the rules. And so journalists deserve a break because they are contributing immensely to the progress and development of the Nigerian state. There's no doubt, in the darkest moment, we must not forget this, that there have been very dark moments in the history of this country. But in the darkest moments of such, momentous periods, journalists have always stood for the Nigerian state. They have always stood for their country. Nobody is saying that the entire journalists in the are saints, but the vast majority of them are committed Nigerians, and they are true patriots. And so we want to have similar, attitude, on the part of the politicians. Some of them have not exactly lived up to expectation. Now we need much more, because to whom much is given, much is expected. We are ready to stretch our hands, and we have done that in the past with government officials, with state governments and institutions of the state, but not in a way that is debilitating to the Nigerian state, not in a way that compromises us. So we just keep on doing what we are doing.
As we round up with you on a final note, I'd like to ask you what you see looking ahead in terms of what press freedom would look like in our country in 5 years from now. If you considering all the things we've discussed, what do you see happening with journalism in 5 years?
A regression of democracy. It's as simple as that, because it's synonymous with progress. The progress of the media in any country is synonymous with the democratic progress that is made in that country. So it is obvious that if you repress the media, you repress journalists from doing their work, the democratic space shrinks, and all of us are endangered, because you are introducing a completely different culture that is at variance with democratic ethos and tenets. And so that is not going to augur well for the country. We have also talked about the need for caution. We have seen the undemocratic seizure of governments, or governance in many parts of West Africa. We cannot, afford for that to happen in Nigeria. So the political class, members of the political class must up their game. They are the weakest link in the democratic process in this country. If you look at, for instance, the issues of election, the former, the chairman of INEC, then I think Tahiru Jega, one of the last parting shots he made was to castigate the political class in this country and describe them as the weakest link in our democratization process. And so the politicians must sit up, must sit down together and ask themselves what they are doing and what they can do to move this country forward. It is definitely not by victimizing people who are trying to hold them accountable. Well,
there you have it. Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. It's always great to have you on the program, Achike Chude.